On July 25, 2026, Marvel Studios made an announcement that immediately sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. The next Black Panther had finally been revealed. But this time, Marvel did not bring back the original king. Instead, the studio introduced a new actor who would carry the legacy of Wakanda into the future. His name is David Jonsson. For many people, the announcement was a surprise. Some fans already knew him from industry. Others discovered him through Alien, Romulus, or The Long Walk. But for millions of Marvel fans, this was the first time they were hearing his name. And suddenly, one question began appearing everywhere. Who is David Jonsson, and why did Marvel choose him to become the next Black Panther? The answer is more complicated than simply saying that a new actor has been cast in a superhero movie. Because David Jonsson is not replacing Chadwick Boseman. He is not playing the same TChalla. Instead, he is stepping into the role of an older TChalla II, the son of the original Black Panther. And that changes everything. Because the story of the next Black Panther is not simply about a new hero receiving a costume. It is about a son inheriting the shadow of his father. And in the Marvel universe, few shadows are larger than the one left behind by T'Challa. Before Wakanda, before Marvel, and before his name became one of the most searched names in entertainment, David Jonsson was building his career far away from the throne of a fictional African kingdom. Born and raised in London, Jonsson developed an interest in acting before becoming a major Hollywood name. He eventually trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, one of the most respected acting schools in Britain. But his career did not explode overnight. He moved through different types of roles, constantly showing audiences a different side of his abilities. One of his important early breakthroughs came with Industry, the drama series that placed him in the ruthless world of finance. The show was filled with ambition, pressure, competition, and characters constantly trying to survive inside a world controlled by money and power. Jonsson played Gus Saki, and although the role was very different from a superhero, it gave audiences an early look at something that would become important throughout his career. His ability to play characters who are constantly trying to understand the world around them. Characters who may look confident on the outside, but are carrying something much more complicated underneath. Then came Rye Lane, a completely different kind of project. Instead of the cold and competitive world of finance, Jonsson showed a more vulnerable and emotional side. And then came the role that introduced him to an even wider international audience. Alien Romulus. In the film, Jonsson played Andy, an android whose identity becomes one of the most interesting parts of the story. Andy is not simply a machine. He is vulnerable. He is confused. He is trying to understand what he is supposed to be. And as the story develops, the character changes in ways that force the audience to question where humanity ends and programming begins. It was a demanding role because Jonsson had to communicate emotion while often appearing emotionally restricted. He had to play someone who was constantly searching for an identity. And looking back now, there is something interesting about that. Because his next major role would also involve a character trying to discover what he is supposed to become. But this time, the character would not be an android. He would be a prince. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, T'Challa was more than just a superhero. He was a king. He was a son. He was a brother. He was the protector of Wakanda. And for millions of fans, he was also the character brought to life by Chadwick Boseman. Boseman's performance changed the meaning of the character forever. When he first appeared as T'Challa, audiences did not simply see another superhero. They saw someone carrying the weight of an entire nation. The power of the character was not only in the Black Panther suit. It was in the way T'Challa entered a room. Quietly, with control, with dignity. He did not need to constantly prove that he was powerful. The world already knew. And that is exactly why the role became so difficult to continue after Boseman's death. Marvel had a choice. The studio could recast the original T'Challa, or it could allow the story to move forward. Instead, the story of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, introduced a different future. T'Challa's son was revealed to be alive. A child, a prince, a character carrying the name of his father before he was old enough to understand what that name truly meant. And now, years later inside the story, that child has grown up. David Jonsson will play the older version of T'Challa in Black Panther 3. The film is scheduled to arrive in theaters on December 15, 2028, with Ryan Coogler returning as director. And this is where the story becomes much deeper than a simple casting announcement. Because T'Challa has a problem that his father never had. His father became Black Panther. But T'Challa was born into the knowledge that his father already was one. He grew up with a legacy before he was old enough to choose one. Imagine being told that your father was a king, that he was a warrior, that he protected an entire nation, that millions of people loved him. And then imagine being told that one day the world may expect you to become him. That is the psychological weight behind the new story. T'Challa does not simply have to become a hero. He has to become himself while living in the shadow of a legend. And that may be the most interesting direction Marvel could have taken. This is also why David Jonsson may be a surprisingly strong choice. Marvel could have chosen an actor who was already one of the biggest stars in the world. Instead, they chose someone whose career has been built on transformation. Jonsson has already played characters who are very different from one another. A young man navigating a world of money and ambition. A vulnerable romantic lead. An android struggling with identity. And now a future king. That range matters. Because the next Black Panther cannot simply be a copy of the previous one. If David Jonsson tried to imitate Chadwick Boseman, the comparison would be impossible to escape. Every movement would be analyzed. Every line would be compared. Every scene would invite the same question. Is he as good as the original? But that may not be the story Marvel wants to tell. The real story may be about a young man who has to stop trying to become his father. And that is something almost everyone can understand. At some point, every child has to confront the expectations created by the generation before them. Some people inherit money. Some inherit a family business. Some inherit a name. And some inherit a legend. The bigger the legacy, the harder it can become to create an identity of your own. T'Challa may be the perfect character to explore that idea. Because the question is not, can he become his father? The question is, can he become something his father never had the chance to be? The future of Wakanda is also changing. The world around it is changing. The Marvel Cinematic Universe itself is changing. The original Black Panther represented the discovery of Wakanda, a hidden nation revealing itself to the world. A king forced to decide whether Wakanda should remain isolated or become part of a larger global community. But the next generation may face a completely different problem. T'Challa is growing up in a world where Wakanda is no longer a secret. The world knows about Vibranium. The world knows about Wakanda. The world knows that this nation possesses technology far beyond anything else on Earth. And that means the future king may not simply have to protect Wakanda from enemies who want to invade it. He may have to decide what Wakanda becomes in a world that now knows it exists. That is a much larger conflict, and it could make the third film very different from the first two. The first movie was about a king discovering the responsibilities of power. The second was about grief, survival, and the struggle to protect a legacy after loss. The third could be about inheritance, about a young man standing between the past and the future. A man who carries the name of a king, but has not yet decided what kind of king he wants to become. And then there is David Jonsson himself. Before this announcement, he was already becoming one of the most interesting young British actors of his generation. His performances in Industry, Alien, Romulus, and The Long Walk helped establish him as an actor capable of moving between very different genres. But becoming Black Panther will change the scale of his career completely. The role does not simply come with a costume. It comes with expectations. Millions of people already know the character. Millions of people remember the actor who played him before. And millions of people will be watching to see whether this new version can stand on his own. That pressure is enormous. But perhaps pressure is exactly what the character is supposed to represent. The Black Panther has always been about responsibility. The power to protect. The responsibility to lead. The responsibility to make decisions that affect people beyond yourself. And now, the actor playing the next Black Panther is facing a similar challenge in the real world. He is stepping into a role that already has a history. A role that already has a face. A role that already has an emotional connection with millions of people. But the only way forward is not to erase that history. It is to build something new on top of it. David Jonsson's journey to Wakanda did not begin with a Marvel announcement. It began years earlier, through smaller roles, difficult characters, and performances that slowly showed audiences what he was capable of. And perhaps that is what makes the casting so interesting. The world did not suddenly discover a completely unknown actor. Instead, Marvel found someone who had already been quietly building the skills required for a role this large. Now everything changes. The next few years will likely involve intense preparation, training, physical transformation, press attention, fan debates, and endless comparisons. But when Black Panther 3 finally arrives in December 2028, David Jonsson will face the moment that every actor dreams about and fears at the same time. The lights will go down. The audience will become silent. And for the first time, the world will see an adult TChalla standing on screen. Not as a child, not simply as the son of a legend, but as a person who must decide what that legacy means. Because the most interesting thing about a legacy is that it does not belong completely to the person who created it. Every generation changes the meaning of what it inherits. And that may be the true story Marvel is preparing to tell. Chadwick Boseman gave the world one version of T'Challa, a king who carried the weight of Wakanda. David Jonsson now has the opportunity to create another. A son who grew up beneath the shadow of a father everyone remembers, and who must eventually step out of that shadow, not by forgetting the past, but by proving that the future does not have to look exactly like it. The next Black Panther is not simply a new actor. He is the next chapter of a story that began with a king. And perhaps this time, the real question is not whether T'Challa can become the Black Panther. The real question is whether he can become his own Black Panther. And if he can, then David Jonsson may not be replacing a legend. He may be creating one of his own. This is DEEP by ASSEF. And sometimes, the most powerful stories are not about the people who inherit a legacy, but about what they choose to do with it.